So let me start by introducing everybody on the webinar today. So my name is Chantal Cook from NALP. Also on the webinar, we have Jane Robson, our CEO, Nigel, who looks after all our marketing, Amanda Hamilton, our former CEO and our patron, who will be answering the questions on the paralegal side. And our special guest today is Catherine Byers, who's a solicitor at Morgan LaRoche, which is a Wales-based law firm. And she's joining us today to answer the solicitor-based questions. So let's get started. Let's crack on. I'm going to start with you, Catherine, if that's okay. So let's first of all talk about the costs of qualifying, like the SQEs 1 and 2 and so on. What are the costs of qualifying to be a solicitor?
Well, I think first of all, it's worth saying that nowadays there are a couple of different ways you can actually qualify to be a solicitor. But the main way of qualifying, just to give you an idea of the process, is that you would do a law degree. You would then do what's called the solicitor's qualifying exams. That typically takes a year to prepare for. And there's some costs involved in that, which I can talk about in a minute. And then the final stage is actually to train with a law firm for 2 years. So that's called a training contract. And at the end of that training contract, you then ticked all the boxes and you become a solicitor. So in terms of the costs involved, obviously there is the cost of doing a degree. So you've got your degree fees and whatever your living costs are during that time. The solicitor's qualifying exam, I think the actual enrolment fees for the exams are about, I think they're around about £5,000 at the moment. But the issue, of course, is if you just sit the exams, you're fairly unlikely to pass them. You typically need to do a preparatory course in order to prepare for them. And that can be done through various providers. The course typically lasts about a year. And the costs vary from provider to provider, but typically you're probably looking in the region of about £12,000 to £15,000. So on top of the actual examination costs as well, I think you're probably looking at about £18,000 to £20,000 for actually getting yourself through the solicitor's qualifying exams process. So yes, that's not an inconsiderable amount of money. Once you are actually, once you've done that though, once you're in the training contract stage, you are actually an employee of the law firm at that point. So you will be earning a salary. It's a fairly basic salary while you're actually training, but then of course on qualification it can go up quite considerably. I think the other thing to mention is that some law firms, and it does tend to be the larger law firms, talking about city law firms really, some of them will sponsor people through the solicitor's qualifying exams. So the way it works is you would actually apply for a training contract with those law firms before you even start your solicitor's qualifying exam year. So a good sort of 18 months in advance of you actually joining that firm. And if they take you on, they will then pay for the fees to prep you for that exam, to do the preparatory course, and also the exam fees. So that can be really, really helpful. In reality, it's a limited number of law firms that are offering that now. As I say, it's mostly the large city law firms.
Lovely. So basically you've got your law degree, so you've got your cost for university, and you've got obviously your living cost to add to it, and then around about 18,000 to 20,000 to do that qualification if you can't get it sponsored by a law firm.
Right.
So
there are alternatives. Sorry, Chantal. There are alternatives. In particular, there's an apprenticeship route, which maybe we'll talk about later, which can help sort of reduce some of those costs. But yes, that is the sort of the standard route into law.
Great. So Amanda, over to you. Same question, but obviously related to being a paralegal. How much does it cost to qualify as a paralegal?
Right, well, that very much depends on the level at which you come in at. So, for example, as Catherine was saying, you could have a law degree already and decide to do a postgraduate, what we call the level 7 diploma in paralegal practice. And that will cost under £2,000, depending on which training provider is offering it. You can come in, of course, at level 3. And at level 3, you could qualify as a paralegal technician, which would cost under £1,000. And again, depending on which training provider is delivering the course. And then level 4, which is a kind of benchmark qualification level, for people. Again, it's around about £1,500 to come in and take that qualification. Again, dependent on which training provider is delivering it. Now, after completing that, whatever qualification it is, you will be a qualified paralegal, but of course, you can't practice. Just like being a solicitor, you need to go through the 2 years qualifying experience or training contract, as it's sometimes referred to. You do need to gain 3 years relevant legal experience before you can apply for a license to practice. Now, that is just if you want to work for yourself. But of course, you can work as a paralegal, having gained the qualification, whichever level that is, I've just explained. You could gain a role in either a law firm or in outside of the legal sector, in public, private sector, charity, organization, in-house legal, etc. And that is where you can hone in on your specialist area of preference in practice. So gaining experience, unlike becoming a solicitor where you have to gain experience generally as a in a law firm, you don't have to gain your experience specifically in a law firm, but it has to be in an in-house legal department or dealing with some form of legality in whatever organization that you have found a role within. So the costs are, on the face of it, substantially lower to qualify. Clearly, though, if you go the degree route, you have an LLB or a law-related degree. There is the fact that you have to pay for your degree these days. But after that point, costs are comparatively, I would suggest, quite substantially less than qualifying through the SQE to become a solicitor. So there we have it.
Lovely, thank you very much. So as you say, we've got your law degree or whatever degree you do, first of all, that's kind of, that costs whatever it costs, and it's the same either way. But then the qualifying, whether you go down the solicitor route or the paralegal route, can be as different as 20,000 for the solicitor and perhaps as low as 3,000 or so for the paralegal. So as you say, quite a difference. But, and we'll come to this, it can obviously depend, it can obviously influence how much you earn ultimately as well. So maybe you need to invest in order to get more money ultimately. We'll come to that question. I suppose before we go on, are there any other costs to get you to that point of saying, right, I'm a fully qualified paralegal or I'm a fully qualified solicitor? Any other costs we need to chuck into the pot that people need to be aware of? Catherine?
No is the answer. There are ongoing costs of maintaining your qualification as a solicitor, but once you're in a law firm, the law firm will typically pick those up. In particular, for example, there's a practicing certificate that has to be renewed every year. I can't even remember how much it was because I never deal with it. Our HR team deals with it. I think it's a couple of hundred a year, but that's all dealt with. That's all paid for by the law firm itself. Insurance as well, provided you're in a law firm, you're not a sole practitioner, that's all picked up by the law firm. There is still a requirement to do sort of ongoing training to make sure your knowledge is kept up to date. Again, all those costs are typically picked up by the law firm. So no, once you've qualified, typically that's it.
Okay, and Amanda, same thing. I guess you're going to need, again, your continuing professional development. You're going to need insurance, those kind of things. How much is that going to cost you as a paralegal?
Yes, up to a point, but only if you, as Catherine inferred there, if you're working in a law firm, that will all be covered as part of their umbrella for you. But I would suggest that, you know, a lot of paralegals train to be paralegals because maybe they want to be career paralegals, paralegal practitioners. And if that's the case, it's a different set of costs that you're looking at. But certainly, whichever avenue you go down, whether it's as an employed paralegal or an independent paralegal, there will be membership costs. You know, typically NALP membership we would suggest that that is retained in whatever role that you have, employed or self-employed. Continuing professional development, certainly, if you are an independent practitioner as a paralegal, you will need 12 hours of continual professional development each year in order to renew the license to practice, which I guess is the equivalent to a practicing certificate. Practicing certificates cost around about £100 per annum. But ongoing costs, are we coming to this question next? I don't know whether
yes, no, I was absolutely going to ask
Yeah.
ongoing costs. So since we're with you, Amanda, let's carry on with the ongoing costs, and then we'll throw that back at Catherine.
Well, obviously, if you're working in a law firm or in an employed paralegal, there are fewer ongoing costs than if you are a paralegal practitioner. So let's take the practitioner route, and there are insurances to think about. In particular, professional indemnity insurance to cover any undue consequence by offering your service or giving advice. If something goes terribly wrong, you need professional indemnity insurance. If you have premises, it's also, when I say premises, if you're renting an office or something like that, then public liability insurance is a must too, to protect yourself and your business in case there is injuries caused while you're offering your services or on your premises. So there are these insurances, which for a paralegal are not so so high that it's unaffordable. For example, professional indemnity insurance will depend very much on the kind of work that you do and how many legal services you're offering. So it can be anywhere between 250 if you just concentrate and specialize in one area of law, to perhaps £500 or £600 per annum. Public liability insurance, if required, can be around about £60–70 per annum. So there are those insurance costs to think about. So we're talking about annual membership of your professional body. We're talking about renewing a license to practice. We're talking about considering your annual insurance renewals. And of course, then we get on to, if you are renting an office space and so on and so forth, the extra costs involved in that. But I'll leave that there because that could possibly be another question.
Okay, thank you. And Catherine, I guess same thing. If you're in the law firm and you're employed, probably far fewer costs. But if you're a sole practitioner?
I think the same. You're then looking at professional indemnity insurance primarily, and well, everything that a law firm would normally pay for you, you're going to have to pay yourself. So you're looking at your practice certificate. Professional indemnity insurance would be a big one. Any training you need in order to make sure you're doing your continued professional development. And as Amanda alluded to, you then got the external costs, things like premises rental and things like that as well, and your IT and everything like that. So it is, yes, it's a very different situation if you're a sole practitioner.
Thank you. What about things like, I'm going to put this to both of you, but are there certain subscriptions that you have to magazines or something like that you have to have as part of your work? Or is that rather a nice to have type thing and that we should be thinking about? I'll start with Catherine.
As a solicitor, not so much magazines. I think most solicitors, I'm sure most paralegals will keep an eye on what's going on the Law Gazette, but that's all available online. I think what you do need are research tools. So one thing I use on a daily basis is a platform called Practical Law. Almost all law firms have access to that. And it's basically a database which it gives you precedents, it can give you practice notes, it can give you legal updates. As a solicitor, you are very heavily reliant on those sorts of tools in order to practice effectively. And yes, they can, it's a good point, Chantal, they can be quite, they can be pricey as well. And again, that's something you get in a law firm and you would have to be paying for yourself as a sole practitioner.
And Amanda, same question.
Same question. Well, very, very similar to what Catherine says. Yes, Practical Law is probably one of the best research sites for for law. And it is just as important for a paralegal practitioner to ensure that they're up to date in their specialist areas, subject areas. And it's probably one of the largest expenses, actually, to subscribe to one of these legal research online platforms. But there are other ways of finding, you have to, as I'm sure Catherine would agree, you have to keep up with your law. You have to keep up with what's going on there. Law Society Gazette is everybody's sort of go-to publication. When I was studying law, when I was at university, I subscribed to the Gazette. Unfortunately, in those days when it was hard copy, I ended up with about a 6-foot high series of magazines that I've actually never opened or looked at, but that was part of the problem. But online research, of course, is much easier to deal with. You're just looking up something there and then related to some case that you're dealing with here and now, rather than get a paper publication. But yes, it is vitally important to keep up with the law, because as we all know, law changes all the time.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a slightly cheeky question, if I can. So clearly from this conversation, it's clear that it costs a lot more to qualify as a solicitor than it costs to qualify as a paralegal. I think probably even without having the conversation, we could have predicted that that would be the case. However, what is the average earnings? Because there's a big differential between the costs, but is there a big differential between the earnings? Now, I'm not talking about at the very bottom versus at the very top of the scale, because clearly people do earn different amounts of money depending on their specialization or how much they've built up their firm and those kind of things. But if you were to take an average, how does the earnings compare, and how much do they perhaps change over from that beginning point when you're very early qualified to when you're somebody more senior? I'll start again with Catherine.
I absolutely couldn't tell you, Chantal, what the average earnings are. They could vary so wildly in terms of years post-qualification experience you've got, your location, your specialism. In a certain way, I think an average would be meaningless, because it's just such a wide variety. You can get there. What I can say, I actually have no real experience about sole practitioners, paralegals acting as sole practitioners. So where I experience paralegals, I experience them in our law firm. And I would say, I think their salary is probably much the same as a trainee solicitor. So if you want to, certainly in a law firm context, if you want to progress in terms of salary, really your only option in most cases is to get that solicitor's qualification. I don't, I need to be careful about overgeneralizing, because there are always exceptions. But most paralegals, in my experience, are on a par with trainees in terms of salary.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Amanda?
Yes. Again, I have an idea about solicitor salaries and paralegal salaries. I'm based in London, so obviously I've got a pretty good sort of take on the central hub here in this city. But as far as a paralegal is concerned, I know of paralegals that earn in the larger law firms. They can be managing departments and earning 40 or 50,000 a year. And now I don't know whether that equates to an associate or trainee solicitor. I would imagine a trainee solicitor is more like on something in the 20,000s rather than anything else. But at the top end of the scale, a paralegal who's employed in a large law firm in London can earn upwards of 40,000 a year. Having said that, the other side of the coin, as a sole practitioner, it depends very much on what your specialist subject legal area is. Now, I know a paralegal who runs his own business, but specializes to such a bespoke point that he can earn 200,000 a year in his business, because he's a very specialist it's a very specialist, bespoke area that he operates in. But generally speaking, if you're going to be a general practitioner paralegal, you can charge hourly rates. Hourly rates will probably be between 20, 30 pounds an hour to possibly 50, 60 plus an hour, depending on what kind of things you're doing for your clients. It's if you're earning 30, 40,000 a year, that's probably about the level I would say for an experienced paralegal practitioner. In law firms, generally, as I've mentioned, in London, top law firm, what they can earn, but outside of London, it's going to be far, far less. So I've heard stories of paralegals who are earning 15,000 in a rural area somewhere. So I think, taken all in all, it depends, A, the area that you're intending to work in, the location, B, the area of law that you're going to practice in, and C, whether you're going to be a sole practitioner, a paralegal practitioner, or employed in an organization or a law firm. One thing I can say is that my experience, American companies, whether they be law firms or general companies, pay far more for their paralegals than UK companies do, and UK law firms generally, apart from the large city firms. So that's something to bear in mind. They look after their paralegals. They value their paralegals far more, I think, as a US company than UK-based companies. So it's varied. You can't really put a fixed figure on how much you can earn, as Catherine there alluded to, because of the vast difference in location and the different areas of law that you practice. And let me just emphasize, if you concentrate on a bespoke area, you're likely to earn a better living because you've created a very specialized area to work within.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much. I think that kind of brings us to the end of the questions that I was going to ask you. So thank you very much, Catherine and Amanda, for giving us kind of the two different sides of the coin, as it were. And hopefully, if you're thinking about whether you want to move over from being a paralegal, move across to being a solicitor, that's given you an idea as well of what the likely costs are and the process. We did actually do a webinar recently with Barbary, which talked very much about the very specifics of moving from paralegal to solicitor and taking the solicitor's qualifying exams and so on. So if that is something that you're interested to know more about, then I highly recommend that you take a listen to that particular webinar that we did, I think it was maybe a couple of months ago. Certainly that's on the website. If you're a member, you can access that and you'll be able to take a listen. And of course, I should also remind you that if you are a member of NALP, you do get a discount on Barbary exams and the preparatory exams and so on as well. And in fact, that discount is substantial enough that it covers your NALP membership fee. So definitely worth joining NALP if you aren't already a member, if you are thinking about doing that. Okay, so thank you both so much for that information. Really, really helpful to know the different costs and so on involved. We've got a few minutes left. If I can pass over to Nigel.
I had a question around insurance costs. And whether they're based on forecast incomes or actual earnings, and how sort of how that is sort of priced up.
Shall I just jump in there?
Sure.
Go on, Jane.
Just because I said before, my actual background was finance and insurance and things. So anyway, insurance is always based on risk. If you are solicitors do have to pay an awful lot more for their PII because they are doing reserved activities. So they are doing the actual litigation and standing up and advocating for people in court and things like that, which are things that paralegals cannot do. So paralegals PII tends to be quite a bit cheaper than for a solicitor because of that. We always say that you should aim for a PII of having at least $500,000 to $1 million coverage if you're going to be a sole practitioner as a paralegal. And obviously what level of it cover and everything will change the risk. So that is what actually drives the cost of your insurance.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Well, I think we're running out of time now. So I'd just like to say thank you very, very much to Catherine Byers from Morgan LaRoche, a Wales-based law firm, for answering all our questions about the costs of both becoming and being a solicitor. And also to Amanda Hamilton, our patron at NALP, for answering those same questions, but from the paralegal point of view. And thank you all to you as well for joining us today on this webinar and for your questions as well. I hope you found it very useful. Nigel has popped into the chat box a link to our previous webinars. If you're a member, you can access those via the website, and that includes that one, as I mentioned before, talking about Barbary and the solicitors qualifying exams. We have a whole webinar on that. Quick reminder that we'd love to see you at National Paralegal Day on the 11th of November. Again, the link to book your tickets for that is in the chat. And our final webinar of 2024 takes place on Thursday, the 28th. I have to look that one up. Thursday, the 28th of November. And that's our usual time. And that'll be talking about the new NALP Level 4 qualifications for being a paralegal. So thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you also to our two experts today. And we look forward to seeing you at our final webinar of 2024. Thank you.